All through Isaiah, the prophet talks about the unfaithfulness of Judah, of Israel. He talks about God's dealing with, the various nations, and in particular Assyria and Babylon and Persia, those being world empires. It occurs to me that God didn't have much to work with in the family of Jacob. Now, think about that. Jacob wasn't particularly a great character, was he?
I was really surprised to find that out. So I must not be studying enough because I didn't know that.
Well, Jacob was a deceiver. That's what Jacob means. God changed his name to Israel. But look at the kids. Look at the sons of Jacob. I mean, what were some of the stupid, dumb, wicked things they did? Pardon me? And even before that, they committed premeditated murder against that family at Sychar. Remember when they came back from Haran, and that one of the people in that family defiled their sister, and they had an agreement of making peace and so forth, but they went in and just slaughtered that whole family.
Hey, Bill, just so we're on the same page, this is the Jacob of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and then, Manasseh murdered Isaiah. Manasseh, king, Isaiah worked with several kings, and it's commonly believed it was Manasseh that murdered him. And then this people that God nurtured for thousands of years, killed the Son of God. Isn't that? I mean, it's just incredible that God's people killed the Son of God.
And they knew that's who he was.
Well, they chose. Some of them did, but some of them chose not to.
And that's why they killed him.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just amazing. These Jews were amazing. Now, it's not politically correct to say that the Jews killed the Son of God, but is there any question about that?
Well, that's what happened.
That was it. Well, in chapter 46, just to review, the prophet foretold the fall of the idols of Babylon. He, in the 46th chapter, thus far, God lays out proof that he was the only God, and then God points out it was his intention to deliver the Jews from the country of Babylon. And then in the last two verses of this chapter, we notice the tone. The message is a little different here. He says, "Hearken to me." Now, what's he saying there? "Hearken unto me, ye stout-hearted." Listen up, you stubborn people. When we use stout-hearted today, it's a different meaning than than the stubborn that was used here. Listen up, ye stubborn people that are far from righteousness. These Jews were far from righteousness. The people of Judah were far from righteousness. But then he says, I will bring near my righteousness. It shall not be far off. And my salvation shall not tarry, or not be delayed. And I will place salvation in Zion for Israel my glory. Now, what's he talking about there? He's going to bring his righteousness close. He's going to bring his salvation without, as a matter of fact, and will place salvation in Zion for Israel my glory. What's he talking about? What's he saying? Is he talking about, the Jews being released from captivity and going back into their homeland? Were the Jews automatically and suddenly and full-heartedly righteous when they came back from Babylonian captivity? And of course, there were only a few of them. The cream of the crop came back. The best of the herd came back, right? But were they? When Ezra came back, what did he find the condition? And when Ezra and Nehemiah working with the Jews that came back, what was the condition of those Jews at that point? What were some of the things that they were doing? Ezra was teaching them. What were some of the things the Jews were doing? They were marrying foreign women. What else were they doing? I'm sorry?
When Nehemiah came back, going back home for a while, he came back and found, I forget the name, but one of the fat guys, some of the Jews had given him a place to live in the temple.
They gave Sanballat, the enemy of the Jews, he took up residence in the temple, which was purely blasphemous to have this enemy of the Jews living in the temple. What else did he find the Jews? Well, when Ezra was teaching them, in addition to marrying foreign women, and then of course that then was tantamount to idolatry, because those women were idolatrous women. They were charging interest or usury on money that they loaned out. And what were they doing to some of their fellow citizens, their fellow Jews?
Taking the kids as
Selling them into slavery. So Isaiah's not talking about the condition of Israel, the condition of Judah, the condition of Jerusalem when they came back from Babylon to their homeland. He's talking about something else here. I will bring near my righteousness; it shall not be far off, and my salvation shall not be delayed. And I will place salvation in Zion for Israel my glory. So what's he talking about there? Talking about the Messiah. He's talking about the New Age. He was talking about the Christian dispensation. He's talking about the church, the kingdom of God.
It references 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 6. It says, therefore it is also contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame.
Okay, very good. So the word of the Lord would go forth from Zion. And what happened on the day of Pentecost, we are reminded, is that the salvation, the Messiah would be there in Zion, in Jerusalem. And I will place salvation in Zion for Israel, my glory. So, he's talking there about the New Testament era, not about the condition of Israel or the Jews when they came back from captivity, because they were a miserable lot, some of them. And this was the remnant. Now think about this. Millions of Jews living in Babylon. And the best estimate is around 50,000 of them came back, of the millions. The cream of the crop, the grade A people. But even so, many of those people were rotten, ungodly. So he's talking here about something other than the Jews that returned from Babylon. And of course, he's talking about the New Testament era. So that closes out Isaiah 46 and Isaiah 47. And this, this seems to be repetitious, but it's what Isaiah had to say. Isaiah 47 talks about the destruction of Babylon. He discussed in chapter 46 the worthlessness of the Babylonians and their idols. And then he talks about the destruction of Babylon itself in chapter 47. So we're still talking about Babylon, its destruction, its wickedness, and its think about this in this context. Think about this. God allowed the northern tribes to go into Assyrian captivity. And those Assyrians treated the Jews terribly. And what did God do to the Assyrians?
They were swallowed up by Babylon.
He allowed the Babylonians to destroy them. Then the people in Judah, the southern tribes, went into Babylonian captivity. And Babylon, and we'll talk about this a little later here in this chapter, Babylon was an awful people. They were terrible people. God allowed them to punish the Jews, but it was kind of an overkill. They went to extremes. So what did God do to Babylon? Struck them down. Now then the Persians come along. And they were an awful people. Is the kingdom of Cyrus still there? No. God struck them down. Now, in chapter 47, we see specifically the destruction of Babylon that's prophesied. Remember, this prophecy about the destruction of Babylon was 150 years before it happened. Come down and sit in the dust. Now, he's talking here to the people of Babylon. He says, come down, sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Wow, now that, O virgin daughter of Babylon, that sounds like he's talking about somebody that's good. Well, they weren't good. The use of the word virgin here isn't defining character. There's some sarcasm there, and there's a there's a perception. There was a perception that they were a tough people. I mean, they were the ruling entity, and so that word virgin there, that expression virgin daughter of Babylon, has to do not with their character, but their position of power. They were at the top of their game. They were on top of the world. They were it. They were something else. But they're going to be taken off their perch. Sit on the ground. Now that's, not in some lofty convention hall. Sit on the ground. Now, those three words, there is no throne, is no throne. Now that's just chock full of meaning. There is no throne. When Babylon is destroyed, there's no throne. Okay. Did Cyrus set up his headquarters in Babylon? No. Who came on the world stage after the Persian Empire?
Greeks.
Alexander the Great was he was spreading the Greek culture, the Greek rule throughout the world, the known world. Okay? Alexander the Great, how old was he when he died? Some of you read history a little bit. About 30, in his 30s, early 30s. Alexander the Great, according to history, was going to set up his throne in Babylon. But he didn't. Now, the people that immediately took over after the Persian group, and part of this Grecian group was, the country was kind of separated into tribes and nations and so forth. They were thinking about setting up their headquarters in Babylon, but didn't. And so, over the decades and the centuries, Babylon ended up in ruin. Never in the history of the world has there been any sovereign nation establish a headquarters in Babylon. Now, isn't that something? Pardon me? He says through Isaiah, he says, sit on the ground, there's no throne. Babylon is done. Not only that, but that real estate where Babylon was would never be the headquarters of a world empire, and it would diminish into ruins as it is today. There's no throne. O daughter of the Chaldeans, that is the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Tender and delicate. People in power don't necessarily clean up after themselves. Why? They're too good, they have domestics. They have people. They have handlers. They have those that take care of them and hand them their wine glass, so to speak, and have their food prepared, and all of that sort of. And Isaiah says to those folks, no more is there going to be that sort of thing. He says in verse 2, take the millstones and grind meals and uncover thy locks. Now, let's stop right there. Take the millstones. What's going to happen to some of these fussy women and these men that are so, so well off and so forth? Now, grinding. What's that? The millstones and grind meal. What's that about? Pardon me? Yeah, and how did they grind their meal? With these big grinds, one stone on top of another, and they either used mules or donkeys or oxen or something, or people to go around and grind it. Didn't have steam power. Didn't even have water. Didn't even have a water mill. Human power. They're going to go from a lofty position to grinding. When the Philistines wanted to heap shame on, I'm having a brain issue here, on Samson. Yeah, Samson. When they wanted to heap shame, humility on him, after they blinded him, what did they make him do? He was one of the mules, so to speak, that was grinding the grain. Humiliating thing. And so these people are going to go from a lofty position of power and eminence and world pride and so forth, and to a matter of they're going to be, as it were, grinding and uncovering their locks, making bare their legs, uncover their thighs, and pass over the rivers. They're going to be down in the mud, so to speak, lifting their skirts to avoid, the mud. They're going to be in a world of hurt. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered. They're not going to have the fancy clothing. They're not going to have the eminent position. They're going to be shamed. They're going to be shamed. And he says, I'll take vengeance. I will not meet thee as a man. God says, I'm going to take vengeance on you, Babylonian, you young people, old people, males, females, everybody. Vengeance is going to be. Why? Well, arrogance. They were a bad people. They were wicked. They were ungodly, and they're going to be punished according to Isaiah. Now, when he says, "I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man," I will make vengeance. I'll not meet thee as a man. How's that fair?
My translation says, I will not arbitrate with a man. So he won't go down his way.
It's not as if they're going to have to deal with man, right? God's saying it's not as if you're going to be dealing with some man, some other human being. You're going to be dealing with God. And that's an awesome situation. You can be dealing with God here now. Well, he says, I will not meet thee as a man. It's not going to be as if you're going to deal with somebody else where you have a chance of winning. If it were man, you'd have a chance. But says, I'm going to deal with you as God. Now then he goes in verse 4, he invokes that idea of a Redeemer. As for our Redeemer, in the Mosaic Law, there was this deal, and we've mentioned this several times before, but this deal where if a Jewish brother fell into slavery, next of kin had a responsibility to what? Redeem him, pay the debt, free him. That was the idea. And so in the midst of all this discussion about Babylon being utterly taken down, in verse 4, he introduces this idea of, and that verse kind of stands out there. Maybe it's a transition between someplace in the discussion here. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. He introduces this idea God is going to provide redemption. And then he goes back in verse 5 and says, Sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O the daughter of the Chaldeans. For thou shalt no more be called the Lady of the Kingdom. It's just going to be slave. They're going to be servants. They're going to be slaves. No lady about it. No throne room. No king's ball, so to speak. Going to be slavery. Then in verse 6, I was wroth with my people. Now he's talking there about obviously his people. He's reminding them, I was wroth with my people, that would be Israel. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. I mean, he's saying, he's telling the world, he's telling everybody, I was angry with my people, and I have given them into thine hand, into the Babylonian hand, and thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. That word ancient there, talking about old folks. The prophecy here, says that the Babylonians would show no mercy to God's people. God said, I gave them over because of their wickedness. I gave them over in your hands, and then you overdid it. You showed no mercy. Even to the old folks, burden was heavy on the older folks. And thou saidest, I will be a lady forever. Now, you notice that he used that word, I'll be a lady forever. Babylonian people were saying, it was their mindset that they were going to be on top of the world forever. That was their who could, their attitude is, who could take us down? Babylon had, about 100 gates. Cyrus had, as this played out, as this prophecy came to pass, Cyrus had tried for years to take out the Babylonians. And they felt safe. It's my understanding that they had provisions in the city of Babylon that would have lasted for years. I guess they might have been the world's first preppers. You know what a prepper is. They couldn't be destroyed. And when our country talks about being the most powerful country in the world and so forth, we better just be very cautious about that kind of stuff, right? God doesn't like arrogance and pride, and particularly when it's mixed with wickedness. We pray for our country often, and we need to pray for our country often, because we're in a very vulnerable position, even though we're the world power. Even though we say that our president is the most powerful person in the world, we need to just pray that we get a better attitude as a nation. So I'm not, that lady forever, that idea of the powerful nation. We're not vulnerable. We're safe. So in verse 7, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst thou remember the latter end of it. They just had the attitude that we're not vulnerable. Verse 8, therefore hear now this, thou that are given to pleasures, that dwelleth carelessly. Now, he's getting into the attitude of these Babylonians, and here they were greedy, they were arrogant, they were violent, they were ambitious, all of those things, given to pleasures, and they lived carelessly, and say in their own hearts, I am, none else beside me. Now that expression, let's look at that expression there. That thou dwellest carelessly, that saith in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. What's that about? I am. Yeah. When Moses was up on the mountain in Midian area, and it was after the burning bush and so on, and God told him to go back to Egypt and bring his people out. Moses said to God, who shall I say sent me? And what was God's response? Pardon? Say the I am. You see that expression? God said, I am. What did God mean by that? The only one. And here the Babylonians were saying, I am. We are the greatest. That dude, that boxer that used to talk about, he used to talk about, well, what was his expression?
I'm so pretty. He had a lot of
He said, I'm the greatest. Huh? Is that what he said, Stacy? I'm the greatest. What happened to him?
He died a horrible death.
Yeah. That was a bad thing for them to say. I am. It would be a bad thing for anybody to say, I am, meaning I'm the greatest. I'm formidable. Because humans are not. Well, he says, he goes on to say, I am, and none else beside me. I'm it. I'm the epitome of greatness. I shall not sit as a widow. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. I'm never going to, these are expressions here to identify their attitude. I'm not going to be a widow. I'm not going to be childless. Everything's good. Everything's great. I'm living a good life. But these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day. The loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection. Now, I wonder why he said in one day. According to history, when Cyrus diverted the river and he entered the city of Babylon, when going back to, as we said before, the handwriting on the wall, when Daniel was called to interpret Belshazzar's, he saw that handwriting on the wall. Daniel let Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, who was probably the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, he said, you're hanging in the balances and you're found wanting. And the throneship ended in a day, so to speak. It was immediate. These two things shall come in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood, and they shall come upon thee in their perfection, for the multitude of thy sorceries. The multitude of thy sorceries, and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. Now, what are these sorceries and enchantments? Well, let's read on here. For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness, thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom is by thy knowledge, and it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am none else beside. There is none else beside me. Now, what are these sorceries? Well, let's go back. Let's jump down to verse 13 for a moment. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers and the stargazers and the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Now, what's all this about? The sorceries and the enchantments and the monthly prognosticators and the stargazers and the astrologers and so on. What's this all about? What's this about? Who were these people? These astrologers and these stargazers and ever heard of the sign of the zodiac?
They were nothing more than self-proclaimers.
Yeah. Ever hear anybody talking about You know, they're reading their, what do you call it?
Zodiac sign.
Signs of the zodiac. Where was that stuff invented? Was that something that George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or somebody got us started down that trail? This stuff was going on, and you know, I guess people need to be careful about you know, checking in with their signs of the zodiac and, you know, that kind of stuff. You see, these people were counselors. These stargazers and these enchantment people, and, you know, they were counselors to kings. Remember when old Nebuchadnezzar had the dream, and Daniel was kind of in the background, and they called in all the people that performed magic, and all the people that you know, read the stars and so forth, and they didn't have any. They couldn't figure out anything about old Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? I mean, these people that think they know the future, that can predict something, that can identify, you know, what's going to happen in somebody's life, whether it be a palm reader or whether it's published in a newspaper, that's pure garbage. It was pure garbage in the ancient world. Daniel comes into Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar says, "Oh, I understand you can," and you know, this is my language, "I understand you can interpret dreams." Daniel says, "No. God interprets dreams, not me." You see? God interprets dreams. And so these people were all steeped in these, you know, the magic arts and these prognosticators and sorcerers. And Isaiah is saying, well, let's just go back to the 9th verse there, or the 10th verse. "For thou hast trusted in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none seeth me. The wisdom of thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. For thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none beside me." Well, we'll pick up